My name is Sophia Hayes, and I was 33 years old when my own sister laughed in my face after I lost my job. Not behind my back. Not quietly. She laughed so loudly that everyone at our parents' dinner table stopped talking, just to watch me fall apart. She thought that would be the lowest moment of my life. 6 months later, she walked into my office carrying a resume, asking me for a chance. She didn't recognize my name on the door until it was already too late. Before I tell you what happened, let me ask you something. Have you ever been treated like your worst day defined who you were forever? If you've ever been underestimated, humiliated, or written off by people who should have supported you, you're going to understand exactly how this feels. Now let me tell you how everything changed. People love telling you that family is supposed to catch you when you fall. Mine preferred to measure how hard I hit the ground. Looking back now, I realize losing my job wasn't actually the worst thing that happened to me. The worst part was discovering which people secretly enjoyed watching it happen. I had spent almost 9 years building my career. Every promotion had been earned, every late night, every weekend answering emails, every canceled vacation because another project needed saving. I wasn't brilliant. I wasn't lucky. I was dependable. At least, that's what everyone used to tell me. You always figure things out, Sophia. You'll be running this place someday. We'd be lost without you. Funny how quickly those compliments disappear when a company decides to cut costs. The announcement came on a rainy Tuesday morning, the kind of gray morning where the windows looked like someone had spilled dirty water across the sky. Our entire department received an invitation labeled Mandatory Business Update. Nobody smiled walking into that conference room. 32 people, one HR representative, two executives who couldn't even look us in the eyes. That was enough. You already knew. Our company has decided to restructure. I barely heard the rest. Corporate language has a strange way of making unemployment sound like an exciting new opportunity. They called it restructuring. My mortgage called it panic. Within 20 minutes, I had a cardboard box, a printed severance packet, and 9 years of my life reduced to a security badge that no longer opened the front door. I remember sitting in my car afterward, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry immediately. I just stared. People walked past carrying coffee. Someone laughed across the parking lot. Cars kept moving. The world looked exactly the same. Only mine had quietly collapsed. Then my phone rang. Mom. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Hi, Mom. Oh, good, she said. Are you still coming to dinner Friday? There wasn't even a hello. I swallowed. Actually. What? I lost my job today. Silence. Then, oh. Not, are you okay? Not, what happened? Just, oh. We'll talk Friday. Click. That should have prepared me. It didn't. Friday evening arrived anyway. My parents' house hadn't changed since I was 16. Same flower pots, same wind chimes, same smell of roasted chicken drifting through the hallway. Normally it felt comforting. That night it felt like walking into a courtroom. My father was already pouring wine. My younger sister, Vanessa, sat scrolling through her phone. She looked up. Oh. There it was again. That word. Oh. Mom carried mashed potatoes to the table. Everyone's here. Nobody hugged me. Nobody asked how I was. We sat. Dinner started normally. Weather, gas prices, someone's neighbor buying a new boat. I almost convinced myself maybe Mom hadn't told them. Then Dad cleared his throat. So, he looked directly at me. I hear work didn't go well? There it was. Every fork stopped moving. I was laid off. Dad frowned. Laid off? Yes. What exactly does that mean? It means my position was eliminated. He leaned back. That little sound. Like he was inspecting damaged furniture. Vanessa finally looked up from her phone. So, she smiled. They fired you. No. I mean, she shrugged. Same thing. I forced a smile. It isn't. Whatever helps you sleep. Mom sighed dramatically. I told your father something like this might happen. I blinked. You did? You've been at one company too long. Dad nodded. I've always said people become comfortable. Comfortable? I'd worked 60-hour weeks, missed birthdays, skipped holidays. Comfortable wasn't the word. Exhausted was. I tried explaining. The entire division was cut. Dad waved a hand. Companies don't get rid of valuable employees. The sentence landed like a slap. I stared at him. I was valuable. He didn't answer. Vanessa did. She laughed. Actually laughed. Not a little chuckle. Not nervous laughter. The kind where she leaned back in her chair because she genuinely found it funny. I knew this would happen eventually. I looked at her. What? You always acted like your career made you so important. I never. You did. She interrupted immediately. You skipped birthdays because of work. You left early at Christmas because of work. You missed my promotion dinner because of work. Her smile widened. And now? She spread her hands dramatically. Turns out all that loyalty got you a cardboard box. Mom actually smiled. Not proudly. Not cruelly. Just, she didn't stop it. Nobody stopped it. Vanessa looked straight at me. So was it embarrassing carrying your little box to the parking lot? The room went silent. Every muscle in my body tightened. How did she know about the box? Then I remembered. Mom must have told her. She'd shared everything. I quietly set my fork down. I'm trying really hard to stay calm. Vanessa laughed again. Oh, don't be dramatic. Dad added. Maybe this is a wake-up call. A wake-up call for what? To stop thinking you're better than everyone. I honestly thought I'd misheard him. I've never thought that. You don't have to say it. Mom finally spoke. It shows. I looked around the table. 3 faces. 3 people I'd spent my entire life trying to make proud. Suddenly I felt like I was 12 years old again. Straight A report card. 2nd place. Why weren't you first? College graduation. Why didn't you graduate with honors? Promotion. When will you become director? Nothing had ever been enough, not once. And now? Now they had proof. Proof that maybe I had never been enough after all. Vanessa reached for another dinner roll. So what's your plan? I'll find another job. She snorted. In this economy? Dad nodded. You may have to lower your expectations. I just lost my job 3 days ago. And I haven't even started applying. Mom folded her napkin carefully. Maybe retail is hiring. Retail. After nearly a decade managing multi-million-dollar client accounts. She said it so casually, like she was suggesting a different brand of cereal. I felt heat climbing my neck. I'll be fine. Vanessa tilted her head. You don't sound very convincing. I don't have to convince you. Oh? There it was again. She leaned closer. You know what I think? No. I think your whole identity was your job. She smiled. And now you don't know who you are. I wanted to argue. Instead, I couldn't. Because she had accidentally hit the only true thing she'd said all night. Who was I without work? I'd spent 9 years becoming Sophia from The Office. Without that, who was left? Dinner dragged on another hour. Every conversation somehow circled back to money, to employment, to responsibility, to learning humility. By dessert, I barely spoke. When I finally stood to leave, Mom hugged Vanessa. Dad shook my hand. Actually shook my hand. Like I was a distant coworker. Outside, cold air hit my face. I made it to my car, closed the door, and finally cried. Not graceful tears, ugly ones. the kind that make your ribs hurt. I cried because I had lost my job. But mostly, I cried because somewhere inside me, a tiny voice whispered that maybe they were right. Maybe I had failed. Maybe I wasn't as capable as I'd believed. Maybe all those years had meant nothing. That voice stayed with me for weeks. Every rejection email fed it. Every unanswered application strengthened it. Every morning I woke before sunrise, heart pounding, wondering how long my savings would last. Job hunting wasn't just exhausting, it was humiliating. Hundreds of applicants for every position. Automated rejection emails arriving before I had even finished breakfast. Recruiters who smiled through video calls only to disappear afterward. I kept a spreadsheet: application number, company, status. By the end of the first month, 87 applications, 3 interviews, 0 offers. One evening, I opened social media. Big mistake. Vanessa had posted photos from a rooftop bar with friends. The caption read, "Some people peak too early. Always keep growing." Hundreds of likes. Then I noticed Mom had commented, "Proud of your ambition." I stared at those words for a long time, not because they were cruel, because I couldn't remember the last time she'd written anything remotely like that to me. I closed the app, set my phone face down, and sat alone in the silence of my apartment. That was the night I made myself one promise. I would never ask my family for help. Not money, not connections, not encouragement. Nothing. If I was going to rebuild my life, I would do it so quietly that the next time they noticed me, it would already be too late. And I had no idea that fate was already putting the first piece of that plan into motion. The next Monday, my alarm still went off at 6. For a few seconds, I forgot. I reached for my phone, expecting to see overnight emails from clients, calendar reminders, and the familiar red notification bubble that used to dictate my entire day. Instead, there was nothing. Just a blank lock screen reflecting my own tired face. That silence was louder than any alarm. For almost 10 minutes, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor. I could have gone back to sleep. Nobody expected me anywhere. Nobody would notice if I spent the day under the blankets pretending my life hadn't fallen apart. Instead, I stood up. I showered. I dressed in business clothes. Not because I had an interview, because I refused to let unemployment become my identity. Every morning after that, I treated finding a job like it was my job. Coffee at 7, applications until noon, networking messages after lunch, online certification courses in the evening. By 10 at night, my eyes burned from staring at a laptop screen. Some days I accomplished a lot. Other days I spent 3 hours rewriting the same cover letter because I convinced myself one sentence sounded desperate. I became intimately familiar with rejection. Some companies never replied. Others sent automated emails so quickly it felt like no human had ever looked at my resume. "We've decided to move forward with other candidates. Your qualifications are impressive, however. We'll keep your information on file." I started deleting them without reading the rest. After the 100th rejection, they all sounded the same. Money became another constant weight. I wasn't broke. Not yet. I'd always been careful. Emergency savings, no outrageous spending, a modest apartment. But there's something psychologically exhausting about watching your savings account shrink instead of grow. Every grocery trip became a math problem. Did I really need fresh berries? Could I wait another month before replacing my running shoes? Would canceling one streaming subscription make any meaningful difference? It wasn't the money itself. It was what it represented. Control. And every withdrawal reminded me I had less of it. One afternoon, I bumped into an old coworker at a grocery store. He smiled awkwardly. "Sophia." I forced a smile back. "Hey, how have you been?" There it was. That question. I could have lied. Could have said, "Great. Instead, I answered honestly, I'm between jobs. His smile stiffened. Oh, that word again. Always, oh, never anything useful. He shifted his basket from one hand to the other. Well, you'll find something. I'm trying. Anyway, his eyes darted toward the frozen food aisle. I should get going. We'd spent 4 years working side by side. 4 years. Our conversation lasted 43 seconds. I timed it afterward because somehow that made it hurt more. People don't always abandon you dramatically. Sometimes they just slowly stop seeing you. The hardest nights were Fridays, not because I had plans, because I didn't. My phone stayed silent. Friends assumed I needed space. Coworkers drifted away. Networking contacts only reached out when they wanted something. My apartment echoed. The refrigerator hummed louder than usual. The television became background noise for thoughts I couldn't escape. What if Dad was right? What if I'd mistaken hard work for talent? What if my career had only existed because I'd gotten lucky? I hated those thoughts, but unemployment feeds them. It gives them time to grow. About 6 weeks after losing my job, Mom called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Hi, Mom. Your father needs help with his computer. I waited. Nothing else. No. How are you? No. Any interviews? Just the computer. I'm actually busy. Busy doing what? Looking for work, improving my skills, trying to rebuild my life. Instead, I simply said, I've got things to do. She sighed dramatically. You know, when people aren't working, they usually have more free time. I closed my eyes. I'm working on getting employed. Well, a pause. You could at least visit more often. I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because somehow I was expected to comfort the people who'd humiliated me. I'll let you know. She hung up, sounding annoyed. Not worried. Annoyed. Vanessa, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving. Or at least that's what social media suggested. New clothes, fancy restaurants, weekend trips, selfies captioned with motivational quotes she'd almost certainly stolen from someone else. One Saturday, she uploaded a picture standing beside a luxury SUV. The caption read, "Hard work pays off." Except, it wasn't hers. I recognized the driveway. It belonged to her boyfriend. The comments, though? You're such an inspiration. Boss girl. Living your best life. I stared at the screen. Then I laughed quietly to myself. For the first time in weeks. Not because I was bitter. Because I finally understood something. Social media wasn't documenting reality. It was advertising fantasy. And Vanessa was its most enthusiastic salesperson. 2 months into unemployment, I received an invitation. Family barbecue. Dad's birthday. I debated skipping it. For nearly an hour. Then I decided something. I wasn't going because I wanted to see them. I was going because I refused to disappear. People like Vanessa interpret absence as defeat. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. The backyard looked exactly like every family gathering I'd ever attended. Neighbors chatting over the fence, kids running through sprinklers, Dad arguing with someone about grilling techniques. For a brief moment, it almost felt normal. Then Vanessa spotted me. Look who showed up. She hugged me with one arm, the kind of hug that isn't actually a hug. Still unemployed? There wasn't even a hello. I've had interviews. So, no offers yet? She nodded dramatically. Tough. Then she turned to the woman standing beside her. This is my sister. A pause. She's taking some time off. I looked at her. Taking time off? She couldn't even say unemployed. Not to protect me. To protect herself from the embarrassment of having a jobless sister. The woman smiled politely. Oh, that must be nice. Vanessa answered before I could. I'm sure she's enjoying the break. I wasn't. Not even a little. Later that afternoon, I overheard my aunt talking to Mom, not intentionally. I was carrying drinks from the kitchen. "How's Sophia handling everything?" Mom sighed. "Honestly, I think she's depressed." "Has she found anything?" "No." Another sigh. "We're starting to worry she'll have to move back home." I stopped walking. Move back home? That had never once crossed my mind. Not once. Aunt Linda lowered her voice. "Has she asked?" "No." But pride comes before a fall. They kept talking. I didn't stay to hear the rest. Instead, I walked outside and handed everyone their drinks with the biggest smile I could manage. Nobody noticed my hands shaking. That night, I deleted every social media app. Every single one. Comparison had become poison. Instead, I filled the extra time with learning, leadership certification, data analytics, advanced negotiation, financial modeling. If companies wanted someone better than the version they'd laid off, fine. I'd become someone they couldn't ignore. It wasn't glamorous. Some nights I watched lecture videos until 2 in the morning. Some mornings I forgot what day it was. There was no applause, no encouragement, no family cheering me on. Just me, and the quiet determination that every rejection would eventually become someone else's mistake. Around the beginning of the 3rd month, something unexpected happened. A former client reached out. Not my old company, one of the clients I'd worked with for years. His name was Michael Chen. He'd always been demanding, brilliant, the kind of executive who remembered everyone's first name but accepted absolutely no excuses. His email was simple. "Sophia, I heard about the restructuring. Are you available for coffee?" I almost declined. Then curiosity won. We met downtown. He shook my hand. "You look tired." "I've had a rough few months." I figured. He sipped his coffee. "My operations director speaks very highly of you." I blinked. I didn't know. "He says you were the only person who ever solved problems without creating 3 new ones." That made me smile, for the first time in what felt like forever. Michael leaned forward. "So tell me, what? What do you actually want?" I frowned. "A job." "No." He shook his head. "That's survival." He pointed at me. "What do you want?" Nobody had asked me that in years. Not really. I thought about it. Longer than I expected. Finally, I answered. "I want to build something." "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet. But I don't want to spend another decade making someone else indispensable." He smiled. "There you are." "What?" "The woman I remember." I looked confused. "For the last 20 minutes, you've been speaking like someone asking permission to exist." He paused. "That wasn't the Sophia I hired?" Those words hit me harder than I expected. Because somewhere between losing my job and disappointing my family, I'd started apologizing for taking up space. Michael reached into his briefcase. "I don't have a position for you." My shoulders dropped slightly. "But—" He slid a business card across the table. "I know someone who might." I looked down. The logo belonged to a fast-growing consulting firm I'd admired for years. They're expanding aggressively. They need someone who builds teams. They're interviewing next week. I stared at the card. This isn't a guarantee. I know. It's an opportunity. He stood, then stopped before leaving. "One more thing." I looked up. "Stop trying to prove your family wrong." I frowned. "What?" "Prove yourself right instead." Then he walked away. I sat there for another 15 minutes, holding that business card between my fingers. For months, I'd been carrying anger like fuel. Every rejection reminded me of Vanessa's laughter. Every sleepless night echoed with my father's voice. Companies don't get rid of valuable employees. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe revenge wasn't supposed to be the destination. Maybe success was. The revenge would simply arrive on its own. 3 days later, I walked into the consulting firm's headquarters wearing the same navy blue blazer I'd worn to dozens of successful presentations before my life unraveled. Only this time, I wasn't trying to impress clients. I was trying to reclaim the version of myself I'd almost forgotten existed. The lobby was sleek, quiet, and intimidating in the way only successful companies can be. Glass walls, soft lighting, people moving with purpose. As I checked in with reception, I noticed a framed plaque listing the company's executive leadership. One name caught my attention. I smiled to myself, not because I knew anyone there, because for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Hope. I had no way of knowing that the interview I was about to walk into wouldn't just change my career. It would quietly begin the chain of events that would one day bring my sister face to face with the very woman she'd called a failure. The receptionist smiled politely as she handed me a visitor badge. "Ms. Hayes, they'll be with you in just a few minutes." I thanked her and sat in one of the leather chairs overlooking the city. Normally, I hated waiting rooms. They always felt like stages where everyone silently judged everyone else. Who looked the most confident? Who was overdressed? Who kept checking their phone? Who looked like they belonged? A few months earlier, I would have assumed every person walking past was more qualified than I was. That morning, something had changed. Not completely. The self-doubt was still there. It just wasn't driving anymore. I rested both hands on my portfolio and reminded myself of something I'd written on a sticky note that morning. You are not interviewing to convince them you have value. You are interviewing to find out if they recognize it. It sounded almost arrogant when I first wrote it. Now it simply felt healthy. "Ms. Hayes." I stood. A woman in her early 40s extended her hand. "I'm Rachel." Her handshake was firm, not performative, confident. "I'll be leading today's interviews." As we walked toward the conference room, she didn't waste time on awkward small talk. "I've looked through your resume." "I appreciate that." "There are a few gaps I'd like to discuss." Of course, the layoff. I had rehearsed that answer at least 50 times. The interview lasted nearly 90 minutes. It didn't feel like 90. Rachel didn't ask trick questions. She asked real ones. "Tell me about a project that failed." "Describe the hardest employee you've managed." "When were you wrong?" Those questions were strangely comforting. They weren't looking for perfection. They were looking for judgment, experience, character. Halfway through, she closed my resume. "I've got one question that isn't on our interview guide." "Okay. What happened after the layoff?" I hesitated. She noticed. "I'm not asking professionally. I'm asking personally." I took a breath. I forgot who I was. She remained silent. So I kept talking. I spent years believing my worth came from being productive. When that disappeared, I looked down for a second. I honestly didn't know how to introduce myself anymore. Rachel nodded slowly. "And now?" "I don't need my next job to prove I matter." I smiled. "I just want somewhere I can do meaningful work." She smiled back. "Good answer." Then she stood. "We'll be in touch." I walked back to my car convinced I'd done well. Not convinced enough to expect an offer. Just proud that I'd finally sounded like myself again. That feeling alone was worth something. 4 days later, my phone rang while I was folding laundry. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored those. Something told me not to. "Hello? Sophia?" "Yes. This is Rachel." My stomach tightened. "We'd like to offer you the position." For 2 full seconds. I couldn't speak. I laughed. Actually laughed. Not politely, not nervously. The kind of laugh that escapes before your brain catches up. "We were impressed," she continued. "But we'd like to adjust the role." My heart skipped. Adjust? She must have heard the panic in my silence. In a good way. We believe you're overqualified for the original position. I blinked. We'd like you to come in as senior operations manager. My eyes filled immediately. It paid 22% more than my previous job. Better benefits, leadership authority, executive mentoring. Everything I'd spent years working toward. We hope you'll accept. I looked around my apartment. The same apartment where I'd cried myself to sleep. Where I'd questioned everything. Where I'd stared at rejection emails until the words blurred together. Yes. My voice cracked. I'd love to. After hanging up, I sat on the kitchen floor. Not because I collapsed, because my legs genuinely stopped working. I laughed, then cried, then laughed again. Relief has a strange sound. It's messy, uncontrolled. It doesn't care if anyone is watching. For the first time in months, I could breathe. The first few weeks at my new company were exhausting, not because the work was difficult, because I wanted to prove I deserved to be there. I arrived before almost everyone else, not to impress anyone, because I liked having 20 quiet minutes before the office filled with conversations and ringing phones. I learned every employee's name, listened more than I spoke, took notes constantly. One thing became obvious very quickly. This company wasn't perfect. But unlike my last employer, good ideas actually mattered more than job titles. If an intern solved a problem, leadership listened. If a manager made a mistake, they admitted it. That culture felt foreign, refreshing, dangerous. I'd become so accustomed to protecting myself that trust felt unnatural. Rachel noticed. One afternoon, she stopped by my office. You still apologize too much. I looked up. I do? She laughed. Someone complimented your presentation this morning. You said, she mimicked me perfectly. I just got lucky. I smiled awkwardly. I guess I did. No. She leaned against the doorway. You prepared. You anticipated questions. You solved 3 problems nobody else noticed. That isn't luck. She pointed toward me. Start accepting credit. Simple advice. Surprisingly difficult. At home, things remained quiet. I didn't tell my family about the promotion. In fact, I barely told them anything. Mom called occasionally, mostly to ask whether I'd found something yet. I answered honestly, yes. What kind of job? Operations. Oh. Nothing more. No congratulations, no curiosity. She changed the subject to grocery prices. I didn't correct her assumptions. If she imagined I'd taken a modest administrative position somewhere, fine. Let her. The less they knew, the more peaceful my life became. Vanessa never called. Not once. But she continued posting online as though life were a competition she was winning. Every promotion quote. Every expensive dinner. Every filtered photo. One evening she uploaded another caption. Some people wait for opportunities. Successful people create them. I smiled. Because this time, I agreed. Just not for the reasons she thought. 3 months into the new job, Rachel invited me to lunch. Not a meeting. Lunch. Over sandwiches, she asked a question that caught me completely off guard. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I shrugged. Hopefully here. No. She smiled. I mean, doing what? I thought about it. I like fixing broken systems. You've noticed. I also like helping people grow. Rachel nodded. I've noticed that too. She reached into her folder. There'll be some organizational changes next quarter. I looked at her. We'll need another department head. I blinked. You've only been here 3 months. I know. We're discussing internal candidates. My pulse quickened. Surely she wasn't talking about. We'd like you to prepare. I stared. For what? In case the board agrees. The board. The word alone made me nervous. I don't know if I'm ready. Rachel smiled knowingly. Nobody who deserves leadership ever thinks they are. That evening, I took a long walk instead of going straight home. The air was cool. Leaves rustled softly along the sidewalk. For months, every walk had been filled with anxiety, calculating savings, imagining worst-case scenarios, wondering if I was permanently broken. Now my thoughts were different. Could I really lead an entire department? Was I capable? Then another voice answered, "You've been doing exactly that for years. You just never had the title." I smiled. It was amazing how confidence returned, not all at once, piece by piece, like rebuilding a house after a storm, one brick, one beam, one quiet victory at a time. Around the same time, cracks began appearing in Vanessa's perfect online life. Not publicly, privately. I learned by accident. My cousin Emily called me one Saturday. We chatted for a while before she casually mentioned, "Vanessa seems stressed." "Oh?" "She and her boyfriend broke up." I paused. "I didn't know." "She didn't post about that, did she?" I laughed. "No." Emily hesitated. "I probably shouldn't say this." "You don't have to." "No, it's okay." She lowered her voice. "I think she's having problems at work too." That caught my attention. "What kind of problems?" "I'm not sure." She mentioned budget cuts. Interesting. Not because I wanted her to fail, because for the first time in my life, reality was catching up with the image she'd worked so hard to project. A month later, Dad invited everyone to dinner again. I almost declined. Then I remembered something. Avoiding people who hurt you gives them power over your schedule. So I went. The atmosphere was noticeably different. Vanessa looked tired. The confident smile she'd worn for years seemed forced. Dad complained about inflation. Mom criticized restaurant service. Some things never changed. Halfway through dinner, Vanessa sighed dramatically. "My company is restructuring." I kept my face completely neutral. Dad frowned. "What does that mean?" She hesitated. "Some departments might be eliminated." An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. It was the exact same silence that had surrounded me months earlier. Only now. Nobody seemed eager to laugh. Mom reached over and squeezed Vanessa's hand. "I'm sure they'll keep you." Dad nodded. "They'd be foolish not to." I looked down at my plate. Interesting. When I lost my job, I'd been told valuable employees weren't let go. Now the rules had changed. Apparently, restructurings happen to good people too. Vanessa caught my eye. For a split second, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she smiled weakly. "I'm not worried." I simply nodded. "I hope everything works out." And I meant it. Because by then, something unexpected had happened. My anger had cooled. Not disappeared. Changed. I no longer wanted to hurt her. I wanted life to reveal character on its own. Sometimes that's far more devastating. 2 weeks later, Rachel called me into her office. She closed the door. "The board approved the restructuring." I sat down. "And?" She smiled. "We're promoting you." I stared at her. Effective immediately. Department head. 38 direct reports. A corner office. A seat at executive strategy meetings. A salary I never imagined earning before 40. As I signed the paperwork, Rachel said something I'd never forget. "Congratulations, Sophia. You earned this. Not luck, not timing, not sympathy. Earned." The word settled somewhere deep inside me, healing a wound I hadn't realized was still open. I spent the next several days moving into my new office. The nameplate outside the door still smelled faintly of fresh varnish. Sophia Hayes, Director of Operations. The first time I saw it, I stood there for nearly a full minute. Not because of the title, because 6 months earlier, I'd questioned whether I deserved any career at all. Now I had more responsibility than ever before. Life changes quietly until one day you notice you're living in a chapter you once prayed for. I didn't know it then. But somewhere across the city, another company was finalizing layoffs. Another list of names was being printed. Another employee was about to carry a cardboard box to their car. And one of those names was Vanessa Hayes. There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. Losing my first job had been one. The morning I became director of operations was another. But neither of those moments compared to what happened 3 weeks later. Because that was the day my sister finally learned what it felt like to be on the other side of the table. The promotion came with more responsibility than I had imagined. 38 employees reported directly to me, 4 department managers, weekly executive meetings, budget reviews, hiring decisions, performance evaluations. Every decision affected someone's livelihood. That reality humbled me more than the title ever could. I remembered too clearly what it felt like to have strangers decide your future. I promised myself something on my very first day. No one working under me would ever leave a meeting wondering whether they were just another number. If someone had to receive bad news, they deserved honesty. If they succeeded, they deserved recognition. And if they failed, they deserved dignity. Funny enough, that promise would soon be tested in a way I never could have predicted. About a month after my promotion, our company announced an aggressive expansion. We had landed 2 major clients. Bigger contracts meant bigger teams. Human resources scheduled interviews almost every day. Normally, department heads only met the final candidates. The early screening belonged to recruiters. On Thursday morning, my assistant knocked gently on my open office door. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course." She handed me a folder. "These are tomorrow's final interviews." I glanced at the stack. 6 candidates, solid backgrounds, several impressive resumes. Then my eyes stopped. The 4th folder. I froze. Vanessa Hayes. For a second, my brain refused to process what I was looking at. Same last name, same birthday, same university, same employment history. It was her, my younger sister. She'd applied to my department. I stared at the photograph clipped to the resume. Professional headshot. Confident smile. Perfect lighting. Exactly the same expression she wore in every social media post. Only now, it wasn't aimed at friends. It was aimed at me. My assistant noticed my silence. "Everything okay?" I looked up. "Yes?" She smiled. I actually thought it was funny. "What? You have the same last name." I forced a tiny smile. "Just a coincidence." She left. The moment the door closed, I leaned back in my chair. The room suddenly felt very quiet. How? Why here? Then I looked through her employment history. The answer was obvious. Her company had downsized, just like mine had. History had repeated itself. Except this time, our positions had been reversed. I wish I could tell you my first reaction was satisfaction. It wasn't. It was confusion. Then disbelief. Then something surprisingly close to sadness, because the image that flashed through my mind wasn't the woman laughing at me over mashed potatoes. It was my little sister at age 9, running behind me on a bicycle with training wheels, crying after scraping her knee, holding my hand during thunderstorms because she was terrified of lightning. For a brief moment, I wondered what had happened to that little girl. Where had she gone? Or maybe she'd never really existed. Maybe I'd simply remembered the parts I wanted to remember. That evening, I barely slept. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about responsibility. If I removed myself from the interview, someone else would handle it. Would that be fair? Maybe. But another thought kept bothering me. What if I let someone else decide simply because I was uncomfortable? Wasn't that another form of favoritism? The next morning, I requested a meeting with Rachel. She listened quietly while I explained the situation. When I finished, she folded her hands. So she's your sister? Yes. And she doesn't know you work here? I don't think so. Rachel considered that. Can you remain objective? I believe so. She studied my face for several seconds, long enough to make me question my own answer. Finally, she nodded. Then you conduct the interview. You don't think it's inappropriate? No. She smiled slightly. It becomes inappropriate if you allow your personal history to influence your decision. She paused. The question is, can you evaluate the candidate instead of the sister? I answered without hesitation. Yes. I believe you. Interview day arrived. The morning passed quickly. Candidate 1, strong communicator. Candidate 2, excellent technical skills. Candidate 3, good experience but poor leadership examples. By noon, only one folder remained. I closed it, took a slow breath, straightened the papers on my desk. There was a soft knock, 3 gentle taps. My assistant opened the door. Your final interview is here. My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. Oddly enough, I felt calm. Send her in. The door opened. Vanessa stepped inside. Navy blazer, black portfolio, hair carefully styled. The same perfume she'd worn for years drifted into the room. She smiled confidently without looking up. Good afternoon. Then she raised her eyes. Time stopped. The smile disappeared instantly. Color drained from her face. Her entire body froze. For nearly 5 full seconds. Neither of us spoke. Her mouth opened slightly, closed again. S. She blinked rapidly. Sophia? I nodded once. Good afternoon, Vanessa. She looked toward the door as if considering whether to leave, then back at the nameplate on my desk, then back at me. I watched realization unfold piece by piece. The office, the title, the executive floor, the assistant outside, the framed awards, the department logo. Everything she'd failed to notice while walking in, everything that suddenly made sense. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. You... I waited. You work here? Yes. Her eyes drifted toward the plaque behind my desk. Director of Operations. I saw the exact moment she understood. Not employee, not manager, director. She swallowed hard. She looked genuinely lost. I didn't know. I gathered that. Silence settled between us again. Professional silence, not family silence. Finally, I gestured toward the chair. Please have a seat. She obeyed automatically, almost mechanically. The confidence she'd walked in with was gone, completely gone. I opened her resume, not because I needed to, because interviews have structure, and structure protects fairness. Thank you for coming in today. She nodded. Thank you for seeing me. Her voice shook slightly. I noticed. I also noticed something else. She wasn't looking me in the eyes anymore. The interview began normally. I asked about her previous role, her responsibilities, team collaboration, project management. To her credit, she answered well. Not perfectly. But honestly, there were no exaggerated accomplishments, no obvious lies, just solid, competent answers. Halfway through, I asked, can you describe a difficult professional setback? She looked down, for the first time since entering the room. My company eliminated my position. I see. It wasn't performance-related. I understand. She smiled weakly. It happens. Those 2 words echoed strangely inside me. It happens. Months earlier, she'd laughed at me. Now she was explaining layoffs with compassion. Perspective changes people. Or at least, it changes the stories they tell themselves. I asked another question. What did unemployment teach you? She hesitated much longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. It taught me that. She stopped. Started again. It taught me not to judge people whose circumstances I don't understand. The room became incredibly still. She wasn't looking at me. She didn't have to. We both knew exactly what she meant. I realized, she continued, that losing a job doesn't mean someone failed. Another pause. Sometimes life just changes. I kept my expression neutral. Inside, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Just understanding. Pain has a way of teaching lessons pride never will. When the formal questions ended, I closed the folder. Normally, interviews finished there. This one couldn't. Vanessa looked at me, then quietly said, "I owe you an apology." Those words hung in the air. No excuses. No, if you felt hurt. No blaming stress. Just an apology waiting to be spoken. I was cruel. Her eyes filled with tears. When you lost your job. She inhaled shakily. I made myself feel bigger by making you feel smaller. She laughed bitterly at herself. I honestly believed it could never happen to me. She wiped at one eye quickly, embarrassed. I was wrong. I didn't interrupt. She deserved the silence. I've replayed that dinner in my head so many times. She looked directly at me now. I kept wondering what I would have done if our situations had been reversed. A sad smile crossed her face. Now I know. She glanced around the office. You worked harder. No. I finally spoke. I healed harder. She stared at me, because that was the truth. Getting another job hadn't been the difficult part. Learning not to hate myself had been. Vanessa took a deep breath. If you decide not to hire me, she nodded slowly. I'll understand. She looked around the office once more. I know I don't deserve any favors. There it was. The sentence I'd been waiting for. Not because I wanted her to beg. Because accountability sounds different from humiliation. Humiliation says, please don't hurt me. Accountability says, I accept the consequences. Those are not the same thing. I folded my hands on the desk. You're right. She lowered her head slightly. You won't receive any favors. She nodded. I know, I continued, but you also won't receive any punishment. She looked up, confused. I'm going to evaluate you exactly the way I evaluate every other candidate. The tears she'd been holding back finally slipped free. Not dramatic sobbing, just silent tears of relief, mixed with shame. Because for the first time in our lives, I had every opportunity to become the person she'd been, and I chose not to. That was the one thing she never expected. The interview ended a few minutes later. She stood, picked up her portfolio, stopped at the door. Without turning around, she quietly said, I'm proud of you. Then she left. I sat alone in the office for a long time after the door closed, looking at the empty chair across from my desk, realizing something I hadn't understood until that moment. The revenge I'd imagined during those sleepless nights had never really been about making my sister feel small. It had been about becoming someone whose peace no longer depended on anyone else's opinion. And in that office, with my name on the door and my dignity intact, I realized I'd already won long before she ever walked through it. After Vanessa left my office, I didn't immediately reach for the evaluation form. Instead, I stood and walked to the window. 23 floors below, people crossed the intersection without any idea that two sisters had just relived years of resentment in less than an hour. Cars stopped at red lights. Someone hurried across the street balancing two coffees. A courier laughed into a headset. Life had an incredible way of reminding you that your biggest moments were invisible to everyone else. I rested one hand against the cool glass. 6 months. That was all it had taken. 6 months earlier, I had sat in my car clutching a cardboard box, convinced my life was over. Now I was standing in an office with my name on the door, deciding whether my own sister would become part of my department. If someone had described that future to me back then, I would have laughed. Not because it sounded impossible, because it sounded like something that only happened in movies. Reality was rarely that poetic, except sometimes it was. I returned to my desk and opened Vanessa's evaluation packet. Our interview process was intentionally structured to reduce bias. Each candidate received scores in 6 categories: technical ability, problem solving, communication, leadership potential, professional judgment, cultural fit. There was also a comment section. I went through every answer she'd given, twice. Whenever I caught myself thinking, "That's my sister," I stopped and asked a different question. If this were a stranger sitting across from me, how would I score this answer? It took longer than any interview evaluation I'd ever completed. Not because she was difficult to assess, because I refused to let emotion make the decision. When I finally totaled the numbers, I leaned back in my chair. She had earned the second highest score of the day. Not first, not last, second. If I'd rejected her because of our history, it would have been unfair. If I'd hired her because she was family, it would have been equally unfair. The numbers made the decision for me. I signed the recommendation. Proceed to final executive approval. Then I closed the folder. For the first time in months, I felt no anger, only clarity. The executive hiring committee met every Tuesday afternoon. There were 5 of us around the table. Rachel, the CFO, the HR director, our chief operating officer, and me. We reviewed candidates one by one: strengths, weaknesses, salary expectations, training needs. When Vanessa's file appeared on the screen, nobody looked at me. Rachel had already disclosed the relationship before the meeting. Transparency mattered. The HR director spoke first. Strong operational background. The CFO nodded. Employment gap is understandable. Rachel added, excellent interview. Then all eyes turned toward me. I spoke carefully. I disclosed the relationship immediately upon discovering it. Everyone nodded. I evaluated her according to the same criteria as every other applicant. I slid my scoring sheet across the table. My recommendation is based solely on performance. The COO reviewed my notes for a few seconds, then looked up. I appreciate your professionalism. That was it. No drama, no suspicion, just trust. The committee voted unanimously. Offer extended, meeting adjourned. It was almost anticlimactic. I'd imagined this moment so many times during those dark nights after losing my own job. In every fantasy, revenge had looked dramatic. Someone crying, someone begging, some grand speech that finally balanced the scales. Reality was quieter, more satisfying, because it wasn't built on humiliation, it was built on integrity. 3 days later, Vanessa accepted the offer. She officially became an employee of my department. Not someone reporting directly to me. We avoided that intentionally. She would report to one of my managers. I would only oversee department-wide strategy and major personnel decisions. Another safeguard. Another layer of fairness. The first morning she arrived, I watched discreetly through the glass wall of the conference room while HR conducted orientation. She looked different, still polished, still professional, but the effortless confidence she'd once carried had softened. She listened more, took notes, asked thoughtful questions. It wasn't fear, it was humility. There was a difference. Our first interaction after she joined happened entirely by accident. I was carrying a stack of reports toward the elevator when the doors opened. She stepped out. We nearly walked into each other. Oh, she stopped immediately. Sorry. For a brief second, we simply looked at one another. Neither of us knew what version of ourselves to be. Sisters? Coworkers? Strangers? I solved it. Good morning, Vanessa. She smiled nervously. Good morning, Director. I almost laughed. You can call me Sophia. Her shoulders relaxed a little. I wasn't sure. We're at work. I smiled. Professional first? She nodded. I understand. As I stepped into the elevator, she spoke again. Thank you. I looked back. For giving me a fair chance. The doors closed before I answered. But I think she saw me nod. Word spread through the office within a week. Not the family drama. Just the fact that one of the department's newest employees happened to be related to a director. Corporate offices are fueled by coffee and curiosity. People whispered, speculated, wondered whether she'd receive special treatment. She didn't. If anything, I was harder on myself to ensure nobody could question the process. One afternoon, I overheard two employees talking in the hallway. I heard their sisters. Really? Yeah. I would have never guessed. Why? They barely interact. I smiled to myself as I walked past. Exactly. Professional boundaries weren't always comfortable, but they protected everyone involved. About 6 weeks after Vanessa joined the company, something happened that surprised me. She knocked on my office door after work. Do you have a minute? Come in. She remained standing. I wanted to tell you something. I waited. I've been seeing a therapist. That wasn't what I expected. She noticed my surprise. I started after losing my job. She took a slow breath. I thought unemployment was the worst thing that happened to me. She looked down briefly. It wasn't. What was? The person I became before it happened. The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. She continued. My therapist asked me why I needed to make other people feel smaller. Silence. I didn't have an answer. She laughed quietly. Turns out there was one. I listened. My whole life. She searched for the words. I thought you were the favorite. I blinked. The favorite? She nodded. You were smarter. You got better grades. Teachers loved you. You were responsible. She smiled sadly. I spent years convincing myself that if I could find one thing you failed at. She shrugged. I'd finally feel good enough. I stared at her. Because it was so completely different from my own experience. I'd spent my childhood believing she was the favorite. Mom always defended her. Dad always excused her mistakes. We'd grown up in the same house, living in completely different realities. I wasn't laughing because you lost your job. She swallowed. I was laughing because, for one horrible moment, I thought I wasn't behind you anymore. Those words broke my heart more than any apology could have, not because they excused her behavior, because they explained it. Comparison had poisoned both of us, just in different ways. A few days later, I received another unexpected visitor. Mom. She hadn't called. She hadn't scheduled anything. She simply appeared at reception asking whether I had time to see her. My assistant buzzed my office. There's a woman here asking for you. Who is it? She hesitated. She says she's your mother. I closed my eyes for a second, then said, Please send her in. Mom walked into my office slowly. Her eyes immediately landed on the nameplate, then the framed certifications, then the city skyline behind my desk. She looked, overwhelmed. I didn't know. I know. You never told us. You never asked. She flinched slightly. That wasn't meant to be cruel. It was simply true. She sat down without speaking. For almost a full minute. Finally, she whispered, I'm sorry. I looked at her carefully. For what? She laughed once, without humor. How much time do you have? It was the closest thing to self-awareness I'd ever heard from her. She folded her hands tightly together. When you lost your job, I thought being hard on you would motivate you. It didn't. No. It made me ashamed. She nodded slowly. I see that now. Another long silence. Then she asked the question I had secretly wanted her to ask for years. Were we really that unfair to you? I didn't answer immediately. I wasn't interested in revenge anymore. I was interested in honesty. So I simply said, did you ever notice that when Vanessa succeeded, you celebrated her? She nodded. When I succeeded? I smiled gently. You raised the bar. Tears filled her eyes. Oh, there was that word again. Except this time, it meant something different. Not dismissal. Recognition. I did do that. Yes. She covered her mouth. I thought I was encouraging you. No. I shook my head softly. You taught me that nothing I achieved would ever be enough. She cried quietly, not loudly, not dramatically. Just the quiet tears of someone realizing they've spent years hurting someone they loved without ever intending to. Before she left, she stood awkwardly near the door. I'm proud of you. Months earlier, hearing those words would have healed something inside me. Now, they simply felt nice, because I'd already learned to be proud of myself. And somehow, that made all the difference. A few weeks after Mom visited my office, she called again. This time, her voice sounded different. Quieter. Less certain. Sophia? Hi, Mom. I was wondering. She hesitated long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Would you come to dinner this Sunday? I almost laughed. Not because the invitation was funny, because Sunday dinners had once filled me with dread. For years, walking through my parents' front door had felt like entering a room where every achievement would be inspected and every flaw magnified. The memory of that night, the laughter, the cardboard box, Vanessa's grin, Dad's words, still lived somewhere inside me. It just didn't control me anymore. Who's coming? Just us. No cousins, no neighbors, no audience. I thought about it for a long moment. Finally, I answered. Okay. Sunday afternoon felt strangely familiar. The same driveway, the same flower pots, the same wind chimes singing softly in the breeze. 6 months earlier, I'd walked up those steps wondering whether my family would comfort me. Instead, they'd dismantled what little confidence I had left. This time, I wasn't looking for approval. That changed everything. Mom opened the door before I knocked. For a second, we simply looked at each other. Then she hugged me. Not the quick, distracted embrace she'd given me over the years. A real one. Tentative. Almost uncertain. As though she wasn't sure she still had the right. I hugged her back. Not because the past had disappeared, because carrying it forever seemed exhausting. Dad was already setting plates on the table. When he saw me, he stopped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he walked over. I owe you an apology. No excuses, no speeches. Just those 5 words. If you'd asked me months earlier what I wanted most, I probably would have said exactly that. Standing there, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt sad. Because apologies don't erase memories. They simply acknowledge them. I'm listening, I said. Dad rubbed the back of his neck, a habit he'd always had whenever he was uncomfortable. I judged you by something that wasn't your fault. He looked down. I spent my whole life believing hard work guaranteed security. So did I. He nodded. When you lost your job, I thought admitting it could happen to you meant admitting it could have happened to me. I hadn't expected that. He gave a tired smile. So I blamed you instead. There it was. Fear. Underneath all the criticism. Not superiority. Fear. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it finally made sense. Vanessa arrived a few minutes later. Work had changed her. Not in obvious ways. She still dressed sharply. Still carried herself confidently. But she'd lost the constant need to dominate every conversation. She hugged Mom. nodded politely to Dad, then looked at me. Hey, hey. Simple. Easy. No tension. No performance. Just two sisters who had finally stopped competing. Dinner began quietly. For the first time in years, nobody talked about promotions. Nobody compared salaries. Nobody asked who was doing better. Instead, Dad complained about the tomatoes in his garden. Mom argued with him about watering schedules. Vanessa described a difficult project at work. Normal conversation. It felt strange, almost suspicious, like we were all waiting for someone to ruin it. Halfway through the meal, Dad set his fork down. I've been thinking about something. We all looked at him. I realized I don't actually know either of my daughters very well. The room fell silent. I know your jobs. He looked at Vanessa. I know your schedules. Then at me. I know your accomplishments. He sighed. But I don't know who you are. Nobody answered. Because nobody could honestly disagree. He'd always asked what we'd achieved. Rarely how we'd felt. Mom reached across the table. I think we made your lives into a competition. Vanessa looked down. We did. Mom nodded. I thought competition built strong children. She smiled sadly. I forgot it also builds resentment. Vanessa glanced toward me. I spent years believing I had to beat you. I smiled faintly. I spent years believing I had to earn being loved. The words settled over the table like heavy rain. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. Sometimes truth deserves room to breathe. Dad looked genuinely shaken. Did you really feel that way? I answered honestly. Every report card. Every promotion. Every achievement. I paused. I kept waiting for one that would finally be enough. Mom covered her eyes. Oh, Sophia. It wasn't intentional. I know. And that's what makes it sad. Intentions matter. But so do outcomes. For years, my parents had believed they were motivating me. Instead, they'd taught me that love was conditional, that success was temporary, that perfection was expected. They hadn't meant to, but they'd done it anyway. Dessert arrived. Apple pie. My grandmother's recipe. The same one we'd eaten every Thanksgiving since I was a child. Funny how traditions survive even when relationships don't. As we ate, Vanessa suddenly laughed. Everyone looked at her. What? She shook her head. I just remembered something. She looked at me. When I was 10, you convinced Mom I was allergic to broccoli. I burst out laughing. I forgot about that. You made me fake a rash. You were crying because Dad wouldn't let you leave the table. You started it. I was 10. We both laughed harder. Mom stared at us. I completely believed you. Dad frowned. So that's why she ate cookies instead of vegetables? Vanessa nodded proudly. It worked. For the first time in years. The laughter around that table wasn't aimed at anyone, it was shared. And somehow, that mattered more than I expected. Over the next several months, our family changed in small ways. Not dramatic ways, real ways. Mom started calling simply to ask how I was doing, not what I was accomplishing. Dad invited me fishing. Neither of us particularly liked fishing. But it gave us 3 quiet hours together without the pressure of conversation. Sometimes healing happens while staring at a lake. Vanessa and I developed something entirely new: boundaries. We no longer spoke every day. We didn't suddenly become best friends. Instead, we became honest. If something hurt, we said it. If one of us succeeded, the other celebrated it without comparison. It wasn't perfect. It was healthier. At work, Vanessa proved herself. Not because she was my sister, because she worked. Really worked. She stayed late when necessary, asked thoughtful questions, accepted criticism without becoming defensive. One afternoon, nearly a year after she'd joined the company, one of her managers stopped by my office. "I think Vanessa's ready." "For what?" "A team lead position." I smiled. "Does she deserve it?" He didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." That answer meant more to me than any family compliment ever could, because it came from someone who had no idea what we'd been through. No emotional history, no guilt, just professional judgment. I approved the promotion, not as her sister, as the director. When she received the news, she knocked on my office door later that day. "You didn't have to approve it." "No," I smiled. "I didn't." She understood immediately. "You earned it." She nodded. "Thank you." Then she added quietly, "It means more knowing that." A year after losing my first job, I found the old cardboard box. It had been tucked away in the back of a closet. Inside were random office supplies, a chipped coffee mug, 2 notebooks, a faded employee badge, a framed photo of my old team. I sat on the floor looking through everything. That little plastic badge had once represented the worst day of my life. Now, it looked like a museum piece, evidence from another version of myself. I almost threw it away. Instead, I placed it back inside the box. Not because I wanted to remember the pain, because I wanted to remember the lesson. Your worst day is rarely your final chapter. A few weeks later, our company hosted a leadership conference. I was asked to give the closing keynote. Hundreds of employees filled the auditorium. As I walked onto the stage, I noticed familiar faces in the audience. Rachel, Michael Chen, Vanessa. Even Mom and Dad had accepted the invitation. I stood behind the podium and looked across the room. Then I began. I used to believe success meant never falling. The room grew quiet. I was wrong. I paused. Success is discovering who you are after the fall. No one moved. A job can disappear. A title can disappear. Money can disappear. But character? I smiled. Character is built in the moments when nobody is applauding. When the speech ended, the audience stood. The applause lasted much longer than I expected. But the applause wasn't the part I remembered. It was what happened afterward. Michael found me near the stage. "You finally answered my question." I frowned. "What question?" He smiled. "What did you actually want?" I remembered that coffee shop, that business card, that conversation. I guess I did. "You wanted to build something." He looked around at the people shaking my hand. "You did." Looking back now, people often ask me whether I think losing my job was the best thing that ever happened to me. No, I don't. Losing it hurt. The humiliation was real. The sleepless nights were real. The fear was real. I would never romanticize that pain. But I will say this. It forced me to meet the version of myself that existed without a title. The woman who kept going after the applause stopped. The woman who learned that confidence isn't built by constant success. It's built by surviving failure without surrendering your kindness. People also ask whether I planned my revenge. The answer usually disappoints them. Because I didn't. Life did. Life placed my sister in my office. Life gave me the opportunity to become exactly what she'd been. And then, it gave me the chance to choose differently. That choice became the greatest revenge imaginable, not because it hurt her, because it proved she had never been capable of defining me. If there's one thing I hope you remember from my story, it's this. Never let someone else's opinion become the voice inside your own head. People will laugh. They'll underestimate you. They'll decide your future based on your worst moment. Let them. Keep rebuilding anyway. Keep learning anyway. Keep showing up anyway. Because one day, without warning, you'll look around your life and realize something incredible. The people who once judged your fall are now asking how you learned to stand again. And that's a feeling no promotion, no paycheck, and no title can ever replace. If this story reminded you that the best revenge isn't cruelty, but becoming impossible to ignore, let me know in the comments what you would have done in my position. And if you enjoy stories where patience, resilience, and quiet justice win in the end, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next unforgettable Reddit revenge story. Until next time, remember, sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't making someone regret what they did. It's making sure they never have the power to do it again.